Today on Talk About Your Community, we are going to be zooming out so that we can zoom back in and think about community design with my guest, Sahana Chattopadhyay, writer, thinker, seeker of patterns, and builder of pluriversal understanding. On today's episode, we are going to dig into all of these concepts and more so that we can build better communities. Kalisa, let's roll the opening credits. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever in the world you may happen to be. You've tuned in to Talk About Your Community. I'm Todd Nilson with Clocktower Advisors. And on this show, if you've never been here before, we talk to people from a wide diversity of backgrounds and understandings and places to understand how they interact with and build and participate in communities. As a community strategist, this is something of intense personal interest to me, how people come together, how they share, how they learn and connect with each other. And sometimes we're more on the ground and looking at specific technologies, and other days like today, we're going to zoom out and be a little bit more macroversal in our approach, or pluriversal as the case is going to be today. If you have joined in for the first time, I'd love to hear from you. Please give us a shout out in the comments. This is an interactive show, so we very much welcome you hopping in and asking your questions. We'll definitely pause and take questions as they come up in the conversation, because we want to hear from you. And of course, if you are a longtime watcher of the show, welcome back. It's wonderful to see you again. Love to hear what's going on in your lives and your community building efforts. And as always, if you happen to tune in afterwards for the replay on YouTube or LinkedIn, we'd love to see your questions, and I'll try to respond to each and every person that comes in. If you're not already, I do invite you to please click on subscribe or follow and comment on everything on Clocktower Advisors on YouTube, or if you find us on LinkedIn or Instagram or any of the other channels that we stream out to, because we are on several. With that, I am very excited to be welcoming back a guest to the show, Sahana Chattopadhyay. Sahana, you were my very first guest on Talk About Your Community many years ago. I think I've done like over 50 or 60 shows now on LinkedIn and on YouTube. And I'm very honored to have you back as a guest. You were one of my favorite interviews and have remained one of my favorite interviews to begin with. It's good to see you.
Thank you, Todd. Thank you for inviting me back, and thank you for this opportunity to talk about a topic that's really very, very close to my heart. So thank you. I'm very happy to be here with you today.
I'm so glad to see you back too. And I think I learned so much from the last time that we spoke together. It's still one of the lessons that stuck in my mind was the distinction you made between the hero's journey and the pilgrim's journey, which was mind-blowing. I hadn't thought about it before, but absolutely the work that we're doing as community builders is not to enable the hero's journey, but a journey among peers and people that need to find ways to connect with each other and learn from each other and grow along that journey together. And I feel like your work has really evolved into this concept of a pluriverse now. And I think maybe we should talk a little bit about that as an opening to today's conversation.
Thank you. So yeah, I'll begin with, first of all, let me state at the outset that this is not a complete prescriptive answer. It is my way of seeing and sensing and relating to the world. And therefore, it is very contextual, partial, and my understanding. And I think, and I'm taking off from there because pluriverse is a concept, is an idea and a vision of a world that the Zapatistas, propagated or spoke about in their decolonial uprising. And they envisioned a world where many worlds fit, a world that is constructed of many, many narratives, many stories, many epistemologies, many ontologies, and many cosmologies. And this is in direct contradiction, if you will, to the universe, that we currently think of as our narrative. We have this one universal concept, and I call it the hegemonic concept. And I mean, not only me, but we know it's an hegemonic concept. It's kind of imposed on the planet as a part of a colonial imperial project, which started, I would say, 500 years ago, and it has gained steam over the years through various, through industrial revolution, through the Enlightenment, through the promulgation of a certain kind of philosophy and what we call reductionist Newtonian science. And then it has kind of, gained further steam with neoliberal colonialism, neoliberal capitalism, and all of that um, come together in a construct that is primarily based on three fundamental pillars, the way I see it: separation, separation from self, from other, and from nature; a sense of supremacy, you can call it human supremacy, supremacy of certain cultures and civilizations over others, supremacy of men over women, and all kinds of supremacies. It's premised upon separation, supremacy, and this idea of limitless growth on a very finite planet. And then when you bring all those together, it's a perfect recipe for disaster, right? And so what we are currently facing is an entangled polycrisis, where one small shift here has a cascading effect on five other planetary boundaries. And I believe we have already crossed six planetary boundaries out of nine. So the more I researched into this hegemonic dominance, I also encountered very interesting and little known work of the pluriverse, mostly arising out of Latin America, authors working in the Latin American context, Indian context. And that's when I started really deep diving into what is a pluriverse. And many people confuse it with, like you said, Todd, a while ago, with the multiverse. It's not the multiverse,
So it's
right?
not this popular concept of superheroes, and participating in multiple universes. This is not a
No,
quantum reality
no.
concept. This has got to do with where we are and
Yes, where we
the
are.
reality in which we
Yes,
live, or the
yes,
realities in which we live is maybe a better way
yes,
to
yes,
term that, if I'm
yes.
understanding.
And if I were to invite listeners to visualize it, you can literally, let's say, visualize, our Earth, our home, and then you have the center, the hegemonic, mainstream, dominant unipolar power structures, and then you have the edges, the boundaries, the margins, the unseen, unheard voices, and they already exist. It doesn't matter if they have been deliberately silenced, repressed, suppressed, oppressed, invisibilized, but they are there. And they arise not from a Western cosmology or epistemology, but many other cosmologies, epistemologies, and ontologies that are already there. And part of the disaster we are facing is because we have silenced this, we are trying to deal with an entangled, entwined, complex, interconnected world through one narrative, which is, I mean, not only hubris, but it is like, it's stupid, right? How can an abandoned, very complex, very entangled world be described or encapsulated in a single monomyth economic growth story?
This is very intimidating to some people, I
Yep,
feel,
it
who
will
are
be.
longing for a world that maybe never was, or a narrative that they believe was, and they're trying to restore. Um, that there's a hegemony. I'm gonna stumble over that word, but
It's
hegemony, a
okay.
power structure that
Yeah,
they are longing to keep in place, as
yeah,
opposed to a more complex
yeah,
viewpoint, something that's
yeah,
far more diverse and
yeah.
interesting and messy, maybe,
And
to think about.
yeah. And I think this is where Todd, yeah, it is intimidating. It's also intimidating because if you look at the story that's currently, our mainstream hegemonic narrative, it emphasizes our individuality. It emphasizes us as, quote unquote, the economic selfish individual striving for competition and selfish growth. So when you think of it, then people find it intimidating because they're like, oh, I'm this one atomized individual. If i if i don't look after myself, then I'm gone. Who will? But if you look at it through the lens of community, we've always been pluriversal. The universe is actually a myth. Donna Haraway calls it trying to play the God trick by just trying to capture everything in one narrative and passing that off as the objective universal truth. Yes, there are certain physics, truth of physics, which you can say the sun rises in the east and so on and so forth.
Mhm,
But
mhm.
when you talk about human and entanglement of all lives, there is just so much we don't even know yet, that to say that this one narrative captures everything is fallacious, it's hubris, and it's just false.
I'm going to and I apologize for this in advance, reductively relate to this in terms of a television show I've been watching recently. There's a show called The Warrior, which was inspired by Bruce Lee. It was one of his concepts, but it's all about sort of the Chinese American experience. Moving to San Francisco, building a life there. I've been fascinated watching this on Netflix. Um, it's a cool action flick, but I think like from a narrative standpoint, it's illustrating the complexity and the interrelatedness of these different groups, and that there is no one narrative. Um, one of the characters, Chow, who is he's not involved with the different factions of the Tong that were in San Francisco at the time. He's got relationships with the police and with the government sides of things. And one of the things that he said was interesting when he was relating to the main character of the story, who's sort of a Bruce Lee type character. He says, you and I, we're people that live between the stories, between the main places. Like he was almost describing as being in a liminal space between that.
Yes, yes,
And I think that story, if you kind of looked at it at a macro level, is all about those different narratives and different experiences. It's never as easy and simple as one viewpoint of like the police or
yeah,
the Tong or
yeah,
the merchants living in the city or
yeah,
anything like that. And
yeah,
so that that just powerfully hit me as you were talking about those things this morning.
yeah, yeah. And I think you just picked up the key phrase. We are currently in that liminal space. We can literally feel, see, and sense the old world, the known ways of life, quote unquote, the status quo dissolving. It is. I mean, there are people who are going to be really uncomfortable with it. There are people who are going to be glad, and there are people who are going to be wary of it, and all kinds of reactions. But whether we like it or not, whether we want it or not, it is dissolving, it is disintegrating. And in different ways, we are in this liminal space. Now, in this liminal space, we can either scramble to hold on to the old, like you said, go back to the status quo, no matter whether we liked it or not then, but at least it is the known devil. So scramble to get hold of the old, or or we can just be and sense the different stories that are wanting to come together. And for that sensing of different stories wanting to come together, Todd, I think one of the concepts that you powerfully describe, we need communities. Individuals can't do sensing by themselves, not in a situation that is so entangled, entwined, complex, often inspiring more fear than anything else. But when it's a community of people on this journey of sense making, sort of sensing into the different stories, it is not only much easier, but I think the work going forward, I've said before, is not about individual heroes, but about communities walking the path together to envision and co create and manifest very different possible futures. So I think of communities as imaginal cells of today and tomorrow,
I
holding the
love that
DNA
term.
of possible futures.
I love that term, imaginal cells. That's wonderful. And of course, if we think about the communities as they are as they organically emerge or
Yeah,
are constructed, whether in virtual spaces or
yeah,
in
yeah,
person, in physical spaces, there needs to be, and this is something I struggle with. There needs to be a permeability between those
yeah,
cells.
yeah, yeah,
Otherwise, it can't grow. Like there needs to be that liminal space. If you
yeah,
choke off any outside influence, it makes it difficult for that space to grow. And I think that's
yeah,
something that organizations struggle with. And I think it's something that we globally,
yeah,
are struggling with right now, because that I think about the line of distinction between a community where people come together for some shared purpose or values or goal, versus a cult where
yeah,
people come
yeah,
together, but they block out all
yeah,
outside viewpoints
yeah,
and suppress and smother those things,
yeah,
and
yeah.
how dangerously cancerous those
Oh my.
those kinds of experiences
Yeah,
are.
yeah, yeah. So I think that's a very important distinction between communities, cult, and also quickly touch upon organizations. So if you look at, and I come from a very corporate background. I've spent like close to 2 decades in large multinationals, right, traveling the world and whatnot, whatever. But if you look at organizations, the very metaphor of organizations so far has been that of machines.
Mhm. Mhm.
Organizations as machines of efficiency, productivity, profit, you know it's they're machines with very replaceable parts and human cogs.
Mhm.
Now a machine is not permeable. A machine can be managed, manipulated, fixed, made to do what you want to do. Most often, sometimes they go rogue, but living cells are permeable. They're living systems, they're intricate, they're complex. And organizations are not machines, but living systems. When you shift the metaphor, you see an organization very differently. You see it as a permeable body which cannot but be influenced by the ecosystem it is based in. And the more it tries to choke out or block out information and influence from the outside and closes itself in, the more in the short term it might feel like it's being safe and managing uncertainty and all the things organizations try to do, but in the long term it's just going to become more and more fragile and non-resilient,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So
The,
with
the, the,
cults. Yes,
yeah, so
yes,
they're essentially brittle constructions because
brittle constructions. Yes, yes,
they have no resilience
yes,
to be able to flex and grow and
yes,
evolve and
so
emerge
yes,
into anything more than that.
yes,
So I think this has a very practical application. Like if someone's watching this and they're an executive, or I know that even within the community builder space,
mm,
there's been this movement, and I understand what some of the forces have been around it, but there's been this movement to saying like, well, we need to quantify the return on investment, for the community. We need to show in numbers. We need to tell our story in metrics and statistics, success. And I have to live somewhat in that world as a consultant that works with organizations where they need those things. And so all of this that we're talking about might sound a little woo to some of them about what it is, but I don't think that they're mutually exclusive categories. And I'm kind of wondering how, as someone, as you said, who lived in the global corporate world, for many years and probably dealt with some of those same pressures. How do you answer that need to, I don't know, like William Wordsworth would say, "We murder to dissect," right? You know,
Yep.
but
Yeah.
there is a need maybe to measure success for things, but how do we humanize that as well, I guess, or how do we pluralize that? I suppose
Yeah.
is maybe the better word.
So maybe I don't know if I told you this. In my corporate journey, I also held the role of enterprise community manager,
I
managing
remember
very
this from our
diverse,
last conversation. Yes, yes.
yes, very diverse distributed communities on social network platforms. We use Jive and Yammer and all the old. So this is like way back, right? So ESN, enterprise social networks, were just coming into being, and I was an enterprise community manager. And yes, so organizations pay a lot of focus on quantification, numbers, measuring success. And this is also, like I said, primarily because of the metaphor it holds for itself. Metaphor as an efficiency, productivity machine, which has to churn out certain numbers, show quarterly profits, so shareholder values, and so on and so forth, right? So it stems from that mindset. I'm not saying it is wrong to measure. When we have fever, we do check to see how much it is. I mean, what's our temperature, right?
True.
So we know whether we should take the medicines or it's okay. We can ignore it. So it's not wrong to measure, but it's a little like putting the cart before the horse. When you put measurement before engagement and connection and um, empathy and building of genuine spaces for generative dialogues and listening, then we are literally trying to chase numbers out of thin air, and we're just going to be frustrated, burnt out, and lose motivation to do something that intrinsically comes from this very human need to connect, to build, to co create, to share, and collaborate. So, if we focus on that truly, genuinely, honestly, the numbers, I believe, will take care of itself. It's like if
I,
I focus on health,
I love-
my fever will automatically take care of itself. I might need a couple of medicines, not more. But if
right.
I'm going to keep focusing on that at the cost of my holistic health, oh, I'm just going to repeat the cycle.
I'm smiling so much because I'm reminded of something that has been sort of rattling around in my mind for the past couple of weeks, and I've shared it with some friends as we've been talking, that whole idea of community building, community enablement, that we engage in organizations or in corporate cultures. I think that you just touched upon that idea of, like, these are like our desire to come together, to connect with other people. That is an intrinsic human trait that we have.
Yeah.
But as soon as you as an organization that maybe is caught in some hegemonic paradigms, if you will, um, as soon as that organization starts thinking, well, we need to create a community, we need to build a community, that's when they seize up and they freeze
Yep.
and they're like, oh, how do
Yep.
we clinically do
Yep.
this? Give me the
Yep.
recipe for how to create
Yep.
that thing.
Yep.
And instead, if they would just focus on doing it, I think about Orson Welles had a really interesting interview. My friend Ilker Consul shared this some time ago, talking about, like, well, how did you know to film in all these different ways that that ended up in Citizen Kane as an amazing
Yeah.
movie and cultural artifact. And his response was, and I'm going to terribly paraphrase this: nobody told me that I couldn't do it. I just went and
Exactly.
just went ahead and did it. Right?
Exactly. Exactly. It's like I would invite anyone who's listening and who's from organizations or just organizations to reimagine themselves not as building communities, but organizations are communities. I mean, what are
Yes.
organizations? They are communities of people coming together across the world from different cultures, diverse backgrounds, different contexts, coming together, driven by a shared meaning, purpose, story, and a shared vision of doing something out in the world, right? In the, I mean, we might think if we are very cynical and skeptical, we might say those vision and mission statements are only for the CEO's office walls. But if we are not so skeptical, we might actually say organizations with shared narratives, shared meaning, and shared purpose are already communities of people. If they could, take off that organization as machine hat and just see themselves as living, networked, permeable systems as communities, all they need to do is enable and create those conditions that allow people, that give people the space and the spaciousness to connect, co-create, and collaborate. They are already communities. They're already platforms that are uniquely positioned to be communities, to behave like communities.
So you are already a community. You just maybe don't realize it yet, or you haven't
Exactly.
thought about it in those terms.
Yep. I mean, they are already teams of people. I mean, people coming together to do something.
I wanted to pause for a moment and acknowledge the comments which are just blowing up out here on the stream. A number of people had just some things I smiled about when I saw. My mind is already blown for a Friday morning. Real equals messy. I love that. I thought that was great. The old paradigm is going. And then this idea of change is inevitable. All we can choose is our response to it. That's a very stoic attitude of not being choosing how we react to things that happen to us, the things that we can control versus the things that we cannot. I definitely related to that. And then someone else said this was kind of interesting. Systems thinking is lacking in our U.S. education curriculum, maybe more than just U.S. education curriculum. I would add, which contributes to our hegemonic perspectives. Yeah. I think the U.S. has been in that space for a long time, where sort of the reduction to easily consumed narratives is something that we tend to live in. News cycles contribute to this. We haven't really even talked much about geopolitics yet and how it impacts all of this. What is your perspective of geopolitics and what have you been thinking or writing about in those terms?
So I think we are in this. I mean, again, I'm not a political analyst or, so I'm going to paraphrase my thinking and say this is my way of seeing and sensing the world from what I'm seeing, what I'm reading, my dialogues with different kinds of people from all over the world. So there is definitely a geopolitical shift that is happening, and some would describe it as going from unipolar to multipolar, which is again, which is again like, okay, one hegemonic structure to pockets of power structures, which will also be hegemonic in their own way. And I just want to distinguish a little between multipolarity and pluriversality, something that I just wrote about in my last article. Because multipolarity, again, Todd, essentially stems from nation state driven power structures. Now, you might say nation A is more powerful than nation B and state C, and state D is just a little island state, so they do not have much power, but they're still engaged in power relations, vying for global resources and global, power structures. But the underlying narrative of economic monomyth, of economic growth, economic endless profit, and that limitless growth cycle really doesn't get challenged. You just have more contenders for the top post, right? And so that's multipolar. I'm not saying it's undesirable or desirable. I don't know what will work. Currently, we also have to admit that we are in the midst of a polycrisis, entangled kinds of crisis. So if we go a little meta, we can see that one of the core reasons of polycrisis is our planetary collapse, which, because we have completely decimated planetary resources at all levels, using more and more sophisticated technology to dredge the oceans and blow up mountaintops and clear-cut forests. So we are, whether it's unipolar or multipolar, unless this narrative changes, this narrative of endless growth, we are any which ways doomed. So, in contradiction to unipolarity and multipolarity, I would say is a pluriversality, which I sort of pin on. It's beyond anthropocentric. That is not only human-centered, beyond human-centered, beyond growth. I'm not saying post-growth. I'm saying beyond growth. Growth might happen in certain segments where required, but it
So,
is
so
not pinned.
when you're, oh,
Yes.
sorry, yeah.
No,
So
no.
just
Carry on.
to clarify, so when you're talking about that non-anthropocentric, so not necessarily not human, I think you're alluding to sort of like not just looking at human interests,
Yes, I'm just
but
saying not looking at human interest only, but
right.
looking at life in totality, more life affirming. So it's it's not really in our interest to blow up the planet, right? It's not even in human interest to completely fill the oceans with plastic. I
Let's
mean,
hope not. Right.
yeah, so it's not. It seems like short-term interest, but when I say beyond human interest, I'm saying more life affirming in a totality, not
Mhm.
only centered on today's technology driven human growth. And then in 20 years, we've blown away everything and we leave a decimated planet for the generations to come.
I love that, and it's not just looking at one narrative myth of
Yeah.
technology will save us or science will
Oh,
save us, or even that socially being better with each other will save us. It's all of these things
yeah,
working
it's all
together.
of
I
these
think
things. Yeah.
that makes
Yeah.
sense. So that's maybe what you're talking about when you use the term regenerative futures. Then
Yeah. 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 So
that,
when
that
I,
this
yeah,
this is
see,
the life path forward
yeah,
for us.
life path. Yeah. If we
Mhm.
have to look at the totality of it, then you have communities, you have many narratives, and you have, I would say, many ways of being and relating, interacting together in ways that are life affirming. So the totality of it then builds the potential, holds the potential rather, to create regenerative futures. And I believe the pockets of it is already happening. We just need to be able to sense into it. And I would say this is very contextual. So, what is regenerative for region A may not work in region B. So, it is up to the local
Mhm.
people there, the local context, the local culture, the local environment, which will, so a universal one size fits all is not the solution.
Right. I think what you just said relates to what one of the guests on the stream said here. This is my colleague Joe. Says this is an interesting correlation, though, between economic prosperity and a focus on the climate. From marginalized populations are more focused on surviving than environment in some cases. That I think that touches upon the context that you just gave to some degree.
Yeah.
Sure. It's great observation, Joe. Um, so something that you said in your website, I wanted to talk about a little bit, because as we think about like how do we practically implement this pluriversality approach to thinking, and one of the lessons I guess that you point to there is learning to listen, and the need to focus on, I want to use the exact wording for this: slow working together and intermingling of cultures that overlap, learn, and borrow, and coexist
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
each other.
Yeah.
Could you maybe speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah. So if you look at civilizational context today, different cultures seem to be appear to be in competition with each other. I mean, this is a developed culture, this is this, so there seems to be the sense of this culture is better and my culture is better. What I'm
Mhm.
saying here is, when the rather than cultures coming together, or rather colliding from a sense of competition, what if, and it's possible, you we have communities as spaces, permeable spaces, where different cultures, contexts, narratives, um, and diverse individuals, of course, coming from these different cosmologies, hold space for each other, not to outcompete, but to truly understand, listen, collaborate, and co-create for a future that benefits everyone. And I'm not saying there is going to be one solution, one answer, a silver bullet. It's going to be very much a journey, very much a trial and error, very much, something that will work here will not work there, some kind of social setup that works in this specific region will not work there. So it's a very dynamic, fluid, flexible way of being with each other, rather than trying to stereotype and box others, and in this, oh, that culture is like this culture is like this, my culture is like this. Maybe I don't even know what my culture is like. Maybe I can learn from others through their lens and see myself from someone else's eyes, through someone else's eyes. So it's I would say it's actually a living world which is dynamic, fluid, constantly emerging, and constantly shifting, and we have to be ready to be emerging and shifting with it. The moment we try to pin it down and say this is it, this is the prescription, and this is the box, that then we are in trouble.
I love that. I think that's wonderful. I, I wanted to share one other guest's comment here, and I apologize, I can't see. It just says LinkedIn user for me. It might be Ilker or one of our other friends that comes in regularly. Yeah, must those things always be mutually exclusive?
No,
Yeah.
it is always yes and, because it can be something and something and something else that we don't even know about, that comes from listening, from sensing, from pattern seeking that I keep talking about.
Then another great comment here. These things always seem to come back to requiring us to be humble, empathetic, and curious. Absolutely, yes. If we can just focus on those important things. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. So hard to believe we've passed 40 minutes here already in our conversation. The time goes so quickly when you and I have a chance to connect and talk, Sahana. I wanted to kind of bring this back down. We've been at sort of the macro level, sort of looking at the pluriverse as a concept, and in some somewhat theoretical terms, although we've had it grounded in some practical examples here. But as those of us that are charged with nurturing communities or regenerating communities that already exist, I'm kind of wondering about how to bake in pluriversality to the communities that we're trying to get to thrive and grow. And I'm reminded, in that of I was reading an article last week, an old article by Marshall McLuhan, talking about the global village, and what that vision of the internet, which has, I think, been expressed in ways that he could have never, thought ahead about, to that degree, where there's this balkanization of different places and viewpoints online. But as I think particularly about community software platforms, and how he would say that the medium has a profound impact on the message. How should we be structuring community experiences in ways that they can grow, that they can be permeable kinds of experiences? This is something that I struggle with as a professional, with every customer and with every partner that I have to work with.
Yeah. I think that's a wonderful question, Todd, because increasingly, as the virtual world for us becomes really important, we also need to know how to design and structure and build it for a more life affirming way of being, right? So now, if you see, you pointed out, the polarization that we see on the internet, the balkanization, there's constant fracture and there's constant fragment. I would also And like you said, the medium is the message. But is it in the nature of internet to promote that polarization, or is it something else at work? Is there, for example, let's say artificial intelligence and surveillance tools that are being used in a certain way by certain people invested in the status quo who'd rather have us polarized?
Mhm. Well, and even the economic interests of
Exactly,
large
exactly.
social media platforms
Le-
that
exactly.
thrive on anger.
Clickbaits,
And yeah,
clickbaits and
yeah,
anger and all kinds.
yeah.
Instead, imagine if, after all, what algorithms and AI. I believe personally, I'm not a technology creator, but I use technology. I believe AI and algorithms and whatever comes in the future can, if arising from a mindset and heart set of a life affirming vision, can actually help build communities that are much more diverse and pluriversal. Just the way they polarize, they can also be used to connect by, by highlighting similar viewpoints across
Mhm,
cultures, similar
mhm.
stories across continents, similar or even differences that actually uh, uh, you know uh, are can be seen in as collaborative differences, if you know what I mean. They don't need to be competitive,
Yes,
rather
yes, I love
than
that. Collaborative
yes,
differences. That's such a
yes.
great term.
So we
Because
constantly we are being fed these clickbaits by certain
yes.
algorithmic, gimmicks. Does that
Because
have to happen?
it's not just about the community needs to be this homogenous sense
No.
of everybody having the same
That
ideas or
would
the
be
same
real. That's an echo chamber. That's not a community, right? A
yeah.
community is necessarily diverse, necessarily very different, construed of very different viewpoints and people who are willing to listen, who are willing to lean in to discomfort and uncertainty and listen. And everyone having the same opinion, you just create a homophil, this echo chamber of um, that everyone's just repeating each other. That's not really a community.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. Um, a couple of more quick comments here coming through. So Joe mentions about the internet. Yes, it does seem intentionally polarizing at times. As we know, social media companies are driven by engagement, whatever that
Yeah,
means.
yeah,
I think
yeah,
increasingly for them, engagement is I don't want people leaving my platform, right?
yeah. And advertisement money and whatever else.
Yeah. Can there be community on something like uh, X or on LinkedIn or on Facebook or YouTube or TikTok? Um,
No,
I think it's a big question in our space right now. A lot of people talk about community
yeah,
everywhere.
yeah, yeah. I think it's really. I say this with a bit of not a bit, a lot of nostalgia and sadness because I joined Twitter in 2008, and I experienced some absolutely beautiful communities on Twitter through from 2008 till 2017, 18. I was a part of, I still am a part of those communities like Learn Chat and other communities, learning communities, very global, very, very collaborative,
Mhm.
absolutely brilliant platforms for learning. And I learned an immense amount. But increasingly, in the past 4 or 5 years, especially I think if I were to pin it down, maybe 2017 or so onwards, it seems to become increasingly these. So you're only seeing viewpoints that are aligned with what Twitter thinks you think
Yes.
or you
Yes.
would like to see. And it becomes more and more difficult to find those other voices that I also want to see. So I have to like keep going and hunting for those voices and those handles and those. So it's
That's a great
constantly throwing up polarizing stuff that it thinks I want to see.
yes.
So
I'm being force fed the things that the
yeah.
algorithm
So
thinks I
I mean,
want.
I
Yeah.
left Facebook like 3 years ago. I was so fed up.
Yeah.
I don't even go there. I just happen to have my account, which I'll delete someday once I've taken my content. I don't go on Instagram. it's again become this content farming and advertisement, whatever. There are some good folks there, but yeah, Twitter is rapidly going down that route. So I think these social media platforms began with vision and hope for democratizing knowledge and information, but has rapidly become tools in the hands of technocrats.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm reminded of the term that Cory Doctorow has applied to those platforms, the enshittification of them.
Yep,
uh,
yep,
you know,
yep.
and
I
and
agree.
it seems that inevitably, like he's being proven right again and again with all these
Yeah.
platforms and the economic forces that drive them. Sahana, it's been wonderful talking to you as always. I don't want to wait a year or two before the next time we get together. I think we should definitely, continue to talk. For those of you who are joining in afterwards, I'll point you to Sahana's website, which is pluriversalplanet.com. And it's up in the chat for those of you who are on LinkedIn, and we'll make sure that it's up on the show notes as well after this. But definitely, I always learn when I spend time with you, Sahana. You're wonderful, and the world is better, to have you in it. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much.
For just some quick closing notes. We've got some great shows coming up in March. On Friday, March the 8th, I'm going to be joined by Clarissa Mitchell, who is a specialist really in the LinkedIn platform. And I think we'll be continuing in somewhat of that conversation of, can you build community on a big platform like LinkedIn? How does that work? What are the trade-offs in a space like that where there are distractions and while the platform is very engaged on keeping you there, it's not necessarily engaged on helping you build your community in that space, and that there's some tension around that. And so what kind of things can you do if you are a community builder on something like LinkedIn? How do you keep people connected and feeling like they have a safe place to express ideas and share their thoughts? That's going to be on Friday, March the 8th at 10 a.m. as usual, Central Time in the US. And then March 22nd, I'm going to be joined, you're going to love this, Sahana. I'm going to be joined by James Finster, who is going to be talking about ethics, regulation, and reality of artificial intelligence. So I think that's going to be too. So it looks like my screen is frozen. I'm not sure if you guys can still hear me, but I am just going to do a quick refresh, and hopefully we'll be able to do a wrap up here.
I think we just lost Todd. I'm hoping he'll be back soon.
So sorry about that. I'm back. Anyways, Sahana, thank you so much for joining today. And again, I hope people will take the opportunity to reach out and connect with you and learn more about what you do at pluriversalplanet.com. In the meantime, please take some time for yourselves this weekend to unplug, relax, and be good to yourself, because if you're not, you can't be good to others. And in the meantime, please keep building great communities. We'll see you back here in 2 weeks. Lisa, let's go ahead and roll the credits.